Hey, what's going on, everybody? Peace and power and elevation be to all you beautiful people out there. It's your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect. So today or this evening, I'm going to go into the subject about Jews and slavery. So earlier, I did a video regarding to Tony Martin, and towards the end of the video, I couldn't get finished all the way because it was cut off. All right. But I was going to I brought in the situation or I mean excuse me, I brought in the subject about the Jews and slavery because his argument was that the Jews played a major part in the transatlantic slave trade. That was Tony Martin's argument. But there was some rebuttals against that. However, the Jews did not play a totality in the transatlantic, but they did have a part in slavery. They did own slaves. They did have their own plantation, especially in the Caribbean. So what I want to do is I want to be able to show information to back it up. All right, and make sure you guys support my channel, like my channel, share the channel, and all that great stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so what I have available, right? So I'm getting ready to go on this website called the JewishMuseum.org. Okay, that's where I want to go. And according to this website, it's called Memento Mori and the Dutch and Jewish Involvement in Transatlantic Slavery. So then going into this information says, for Black History Month 2019, the Jewish Museum London hosted an exposition on the Jewish Abayudaya community in Uganda and organized tours exploring ways in which race is portrayed through religion. One of the objects in the museum collection discussed in the Black History Tour is a painting with the title A Memento Mori. A Memento Mori was painted by the Dutch painter Benjamin Gudens Sr. in 1681. It shows a young white man in the center and his servant, a smaller black man, in the right corner, both fashionably dressed. And it goes on to say they are both looking at bones in a rotting corpse attacked by flies and birds in a cemetery. The wealthy man hides the view from his face, and his servant points towards the scene. There are moralistic quotation in Hebrew at the top and text in Spanish at the bottom of the picture. It says this painting is one of three memento mori pieces that are very unusual due to their Jewish influences. It was commissioned by Isaac de Matata Abab from Amsterdam. So the history of memento mori paintings. Memento mori is a Latin phrase that translates to remember you must die. Memento mori paintings use metaphors to show life's shortness and fragility. They often depict symbols of morality such as skulls, clocks, and extinguished candles or rotten fruits and flowers. Particularly in the Netherlands in the 16th and 17th century, memento mori still life paintings became very popular and were often also called benatas. Memento mori paintings are famous within Christian iconography, but the tradition goes back to the Romans' time. All right. Then it also says, at an empirical Roman triumph, the military generals were paraded through the streets on a carried and presented to the public as divine. On a carriage, they would have an enslaved person standing behind them, repeating the phrase "memento mori." This was to remind the generals that despite their godlike adoration on that day, they could die or be brought down the very next day. It says, as the Roman Empire changed and later adopted Christianity as a state religion, the idea of memento mori also evolved and became a method to instill an idea to seize the day. It was adopted by branches of Christianity as a reason to avoid sin, as pleasure are momentary and punishment is everlasting. The Christian adoption of the memento mori message is important as it shows why these three Jewish pieces are so rare. And then also goes in to talk about the transatlantic slavery and Dutch and the Jewish involvement. So now it says the Atlantic slave trade or transatlantic slave trade that took place from the 16th to the 19th century transported about 12 million enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to North and South America. This makes it the biggest forced migration in history. The majority of enslaved people were sold by Africans from central and western parts of Africa to European slave traders who shipped them to the New World. The main European trading countries were Portugal, the United Kingdom, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. And then it goes on to say the Dutch first participated in transatlantic slavery in 1630 by transporting slaves to Brazil. Following that, the Netherlands also got involved in the slave trade to the Spanish colonies. In the 18th century, the country's most important slavery markets were what are today's Suriname and Guyana. Initially, the Dutch trade was organized by the so-called Dutch West Indies Company, but after 1730, an era of the free trade developed. The Dutch part in transatlantic slavery is estimated at 5 to 7%. This means that about 550,000 to 600,000 Africans were deported by the Netherlands. Dutch Orthodox Rabbi Lodi van de Kamp wrote a book about Dutch Jewish complicity in the transatlantic slave trade. He talks about the Joel Savannah or Holden Savannah, Jewish Savannah, an agricultural community with 40 Jewish-owned plantation with at least 5,000 enslaved people in a part of former Dutch Guyana. And it says, Seymour Drescher, a historian at the University of Pittsburgh, stated that Dutch Jews have had accounted for the resale of at least 15,000 enslaved people on the Caribbean islands of Curaçao. According to Drescher, there was a time when Jewish people controlled about 17% of the Caribbean trade in Dutch colonies. However, Jewish involvement in transatlantic slave trade transatlantic slavery is not as unique as wealthy merchants across Europe of different faiths all participated. Let me see. What's going on? Ears to the street. What's up? Shout out to you. Peace be upon you. Thank you for coming through. All right, so far that we know that those who were Dutch, right, and particularly they played their part into what is known as the transatlantic slave trade. And again, we find that they was in places like Suriname and Guyana for the most part where they had the plantation. Okay, according to the article. Now it says resistance and abolition. It goes on to say the first people to fight for abolition were the captives and enslaved themselves. Many people who were enslaved resist, whether against their capture in Africa or their sale and exploitation on plantation in the Americas. Still, it took a long time for governments to pass official bills to abolish slavery. Slavery was made illegal in Suriname and the Antilles in 1863, which made the Netherlands one of the last countries to abolish slavery. The effects were not immediate everywhere, as plantation workers in Suriname had to continue their formal work for another 10 years. For the 150th anniversary of Dutch abolition in 2013, some institutions organized activities and exposition to remember this dark period of history. Since the abolition of transatlantic slavery, many people are still continuing the struggle against oppression, exploitation, and inequality. In their expedition, the International Slavery Museum in Liverpool write, only when we understand transatlantic slavery and its profound influences can we hope to understand the modern world. Only when we are prepared to fight for freedom and equality will we have any hope of attaining it. Okay? So, as you see, that's the information on the history about the transatlantic slave trade. Okay? And you know what's very interesting is the Jews, the Jewish scholars, the Jewish historians, they wrote information about this. They did the research, but the question becomes now, well, why we never ever heard about the Jewish people playing their role in the transatlantic slave trade, except for those who were, except of the information that was passed on by the members of the Nation of Islam and Dr. Tony Martin. Why we never heard about this in school? Why we never was taught this in college? How many people ever known about it? So I do have books, right? Okay, so I do have books about the Jews and the relationship they had in America. So, and also just slavery in general. So what I'm going to do, I want to play a video that I was watching earlier. Okay, I want to play this video for you guys and just have the conversation from there. All right, so this video is entitled Jewish Slave Owners of Jamaica by Professor Stanley Mervis, interviewed by. Let's talk. Hold on.
On Jews of 18th century Jamaica, published by Yale University Press. So very exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to write this?
Well, I started my graduate work writing about travel literature and the Sephardic experience, people like Yitzhak Chaim David Azoulay. And when I was doing my PhD at the Graduate Center for City University of New York, my advisor, Jane Gerber, who is a expert in the Sephardic experience writ large, suggested I go to Jamaica and look at archives there. And so I said, yes, why wouldn't you? Yeah. And there I found Last Will and Testaments in abundance. And it really, I became enamored with these sources, and it really changed the type of historian I was, what kind of text I was interested in, what aspect of Jewish life I really wanted to uncover. Also, Jamaica became a very fruitful place because the more I searched, I realized there were no surviving communal documents from Jamaica from the 18th century. They'd all been destroyed in an earthquake in 1907. So having this abundance of probate records, I realized that maybe the only way to really uncover the lives of this local community. So I've been spending the last several years reading wills and trying to reconstruct the history of a whole community based on just those documents.
So if you ask the average American Jew, how many Jews ever lived in Jamaica, they'd say just a few vacationers for vacation. So what's the truth about that?
Well, that's not inaccurate today. And today there are about 200 Jews in Jamaica, which actually makes it quite a large Caribbean community. And the community today is made up of an old guard of Portuguese, and there's a lot of Israelis there, and also a lot of people of color who are connected to the community either by having a heritage of having been Jewish or descended from a Jewish person, or they are attracted to Judaism. So that's the makeup of the community today. In the 18th century, the community reached a peak at around 1,000, which still doesn't seem like a lot. And it was actually smaller than other Caribbean communities. So Curacao and Suriname all had larger Jewish populations in the 18th century. Those were Dutch colonies. But Jamaica alone was bigger than all North America put together. So the communities like New York and Philadelphia and Newport and Charleston, which is so heavily in our focus of the early American Jewish experience, really that didn't amount to as many Jews that were in Kingston and Spanish Town together, not to mention all the Jews in the west coast of the island as well.
So that's really the beginning of the story in this region. So, so what is the dynamic in play with Jews and slavery in Jamaica?
Yeah, so this is obviously a huge aspect of what I write about, and the reason I write about this so much is because it was a very conspicuous aspect of the wills. As I was reading the wills, there you find that that slave populations are being bequeathed en masse, and in that they're being named individually, and also you see a lot of evidence, sometimes very direct and articulate, of concubinage or relationships, sexual relationships with women of color, both enslaved and free, and then incorporating their children and to some extent into the family through voluntary inheritance. So that all made me realize that we need to address the issue of Jewish slave ownership. Over time, I've also realized that this has been the subject of competing tendencies. One coming from an anti-Jewish position like the Nation of Islam that wanted to make the case that Jews were overly represented in the slave trade and were overly abusive to slaves. And that's not true. In fact, it's kind of puzzling why Jews weren't more involved in the slave trade, since it was a totally open type of endeavor that had no guilds or protections like that. And Jews owned slaves to the same extent that everybody else did, so there were no particularities. Now, this stands in contrast to a rival kind of mentality where Jews must have treated their slaves better. Because how could you be sitting at a Passover Seder saying you were once slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt while being served by slaves? But people did that. And so some scholars reached an apologetic conclusion in the 20th century saying that Jews manumitted their slaves more readily or treated them better. And I find that no position really captures the truth. So in fact, I crunched the numbers in my wills, and I found that slaves were about 11 times more likely to be bequeathed than they were to be freed by Jews. So it's very uncommon to actually free manumit slaves. And there are cases of Jewish abuse of slaves. And then there are plenty of cases of manumissions. In one case, he manumits a Jewish slave owner manumits his quote-unquote mulatto son because of the love and affection he has for him. So there are cases of sort of sentimentality as well. But Jews are like everybody else.
Right.
There are some abusive slave owners, and there are some that own slaves because that's what's done in the colony where
Right.
they live in. Yeah.
So if it's the case that Jews were more or less following the same patterns as anyone else living in that area, is it your understanding that that's the same case for the Jewish North in North America and the Jewish South in North America, that essentially they operate no different than those in the region?
Yeah, I think that that's where we are in the scholarship on this issue right now. And there's some new scholarship coming out, especially focused on Suriname, where Jews had a whole plantation community of their own, autonomous Jewish plantation village called Yoden Savannah, where they enslaved thousands of Africans. So there's been a lot of new research, and I think where we are writ large is that the Jews show no particularity in their slave ownership than anybody else. And that's true in the American South as well. And there were, proportionally to the numbers, because there were more Jews living in the North at the time of the Civil War, but proportionally there was as much support for the Southern cause among Jews as there were for as there was for the cause of the North. And ironically,
All right, so you guys heard the information basically. What this professor was talking about, and he wrote a book called let me see, let me put up the title of the book on here. So he wrote a book called The Jews of the 18th Century Jamaica, which came out in 2020. Okay, so which I am going to go into. All right, so he written a book about the Jews of the 18th century in Jamaica. And again, like I said, I have plenty of other sources to validate and back it up. All right. And also, I'm going to read some of the books from the authors. But before I even go there, let me just go ahead and go into the sources. Yeah, so let me just go ahead and go into the sources. I'm going to go ahead and go into the information that Tony Martin had written, what I was trying to do earlier. All right, so let me just go ahead and go into the source that I was trying to read earlier. So one of the books that I was trying to get into earlier by Tony Martin, which is called The Jewish Onslaught, Departures from the Wesley Battlefront. All right, so let's just go into the introduction. So what he was saying, in January 1993, I was minding my own business and teaching my Wesley College survey course on African American history when a funny thing happened. The long arm of Jewish intolerance reached into my classroom. Unknown to me, three student officers of the Jewish Halil organization sat in on my class and remained for a single period only. Their purpose was to monitor my presentation. As one of them explained in a campus meeting later, Jewish students had noticed the secret relationship between blacks and Jews offered my among my offerings in the school bookstore. The book documents the considerable Jewish involvement in the transatlantic African slave trade, the dissemination of which knowledge they as Jews consider as anti-Semitic and most hateful act. All right, so then skip on down. He said the Hahil activists left my class and headed straight for the president, dean, and associate dean of the college. They then went to the current chair of my own department, Africana Study, like their elders. They evinced a bulldog-like instinct for going after the jugular of their intended victims. For the last 3 decades of Jewish assault on black progress, that jugular has usually meant the economic livelihood of black people. All right. So, according to Tony Martin, he was already faced with the controversy because he told his students to read the book called The Black and Jews Relationship. And that sparked a controversy because of the fact that his argument is that the Jews were the main population of people that was in the center front of the transatlantic slave trade. So let's go ahead. Let's go to the first chapter. All right. Let's go down to chapter 3. It says, Master we seek. So it says, one of the more successful Jewish tactics has been their ability to find ambitious or alienated black persons to do their bidding. While not a single Jew on Wesley campus have come out openly against the access of their co-religionist campaign, 2 black professors have jumped into the fray as standard bearers for the Jews. One Africana department chair, Kojo, has already been elevated by a grateful ADL to the lofty position of eminent scholar. In the ADL's latest pamphlet against black people, which quotes him with deep reverence, Nancy K. Kaufman, executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Boston, has likewise gratefully exalted Kojo to the same lofty pinnacle as Gates. She has appointed them both responsible black leaders. In the old days, they were called good Negroes. Kaufman, a signatory to the Jewish press release, was writing in the Boston Jewish Advocate of the May 14th through the 20th, 1993, more Jewish honors will be heaped upon all concerned. And it says Wesley, other black Jewish spokesman, economic professor Marcellus Andrews was taken to task by black students for the most anti-black statement spawned by the controversy to date. Andrews likened me to a racist Pied Piper and wonder how and why this person, me, has gained a following on campus. He found an answer in the alleged stupidity of Wesley black women. The fact that mainly black students supported me, he wrote, confirmed the judgment of many on the faculty that blacks really are intellectually weak and morally lazy. A delighted Wesley News ran this article for 2 weeks. All right, so basically, in his book, again, he goes into the controversy. He goes into the controversy about the fact that the students are reading the books from the Nation of Islam and his commentary regarding to the Jews. Now, I will say this again, part of it is true that they did play a part into slavery. All right. So I think what they were offended by the fact that he made them the uh, main focus point of slavery. That's what they were offended by. But the truth is in the pudding that the Jews did play a part in it. They did own slaves, but what happened is those Jewish people at that time they didn't want that information to be put out into the public. They didn't want people to be having that conversation, discussion about that. All right. And if you say anything that's deemed negative about the Jewish community, then that's when you consider to be anti-Semitic. That's when you be considered to be anti-Semitic because you said something very disrespectful and not so positive. But the case is that the information is historical, but it was just never talked about. It was never brought into the public's eye. And now it has become a problem because you have a black man that's saying something, and now people come for him and ready to antagonize him for the statements that he had made. So if you guys never read the book by Tony Martin, it's called The Jewish Onslaught. So you guys get that book when you get a chance to. All right, so what I'm going to do is I am going to take a look at the secret relationship between blacks and Jews. All right. So the secret relationship between blacks and Jews by the Nation of Islam. And what did they say on here that caused so much controversy? All right, so the book was written in 1991. Excuse me. The book was written in 1991, always, and then it was copyrighted again in 2005, then it was copyrighted again in 2015. All right, so the introduction says, throughout history, Jews have faced the charge of economic exploitation of Gentile communities around the world. Indeed, no single group of people has faced blanket explosion in so many places around the world as frequently as have the Jews. The pattern and the charges are familiar: monopolization, usury, sharp practices, the selling of cheap goods, frequent bankruptcy, etc. All such claims seem to preface the explosion orders and are vigorously denied both by those charged and by the Jewish writers of history. Then it goes on to say, but that is not the only charge made against the Jewish people. Jews have been conclusively linked to the greatest criminal endeavor ever undertaken against an entire race of people, a crime against humanity, the Black African Holocaust. They were participants in the kidnapping and forcible exploitation of millions of Black African citizens into a winch and inhuman life of bondage for the financial benefit of Jews. The effects of this unspeakable tragedy are still being felt among the peoples of the world at this very hour. It says, deep with the recess of the Jewish historical record is the infutable evidence that the most prominent of the Jewish pilgrim fathers used kidnapped Black Africans disproportionately more than any other ethnic or religious group in the world history and participated in every aspect of the international slave trade. The immense wealth of Jews, as with most of the white colonial fathers, was acquired by the brutal subjugation of Black Africans purely on the basis of the skin color, a concept unfamiliar to Moses. It says, now compiled for the first time, the Jewish sources revealed the extent of their complicity in Black slavery in the most graphic of terms. All right. Then it go on to say Rabbi Henry Cohen, author of the book Justice, Justice, make a telling point. The parallel between the Nazi terror and the American slave trade are more startling than we may realize. When Negroes were brought from the heart of Africa to the American South, one third died en route to the African coast, and one third died in the suffocating prisons on board ships. Once here, families were purposely broken up, husband, wife, and children forced to go their separate ways. Must we be reminded of the death toll in the suffocating boxcarts bound for what is it, Auschwitz, or Auschwitz, or of the tearing of children from their mother's arm? So it says, furthermore, in her Faith of the Jews, a people torn between Israeli power and Jewish ethics, Roberta Stratis Froelich confirms the reality of her people's Western development. It says, whether so many Southern Jews have achieved so high a level of social, political, economic, and intellectual status and recognition without the presence of the lowly and degraded slave is indeed Du Bois. How ironic that the distinction bestowed upon Jewish men like Judah P. Benjamin were in some measure depending upon the suffering of the Negro slaves they bought and sold with such equanimity. So, as you can see, there were sources that was being used in the book to really back up their argument about the Jewish slave owners and those who were slave traders in the plantation. All right, so excuse me, y'all. Sorry about that. So let's go into the part where it says Jews and the African slave trade. So it talks about the Caribbean, Brazil, Suriname, Saint Dominique, which is now Haiti. Okay, Saint Thomas, Jews and slavery in colonial North America. All right, so it says Jews and the African slave trade. Throughout the history of the practice, Jews have been involved in the purchase or sale of human beings. This fact is confirmed by their own scholar and historians. In his book, A History of the Jews, Solomon Grazel states that Jews were among the most important slave dealers in European society. Lady Magnus writes that in the Middle Age, the principal purchaser of slaves were found among the Jews. They seem to always and everywhere at the hand to buy and to have the means equally ready to pay. All right, so you guys just give me one moment, please, so I can transfer over.